Would you like to join us at the table so that when it comes time for questions, you can ask questions as well at the start? And sorry, what was your name? Sorry, what was that? Lotta. All right. Yeah, on the side. Yeah. So in case you missed what I was saying, just on the proviso that that questions are through the chair, through me.
Yep.
So I'm the chairperson of the community board, and we take we take turns. We respect that the staff are doing their job and they have to adhere by a process that isn't necessarily of their choosing. So but we're really keen to make sure that all your questions are answered. Yeah. Right. So if you'd like to join us in our opening karakia.
Sorry.
It'll be up on the screen shortly.
Good luck. Sorry, it's not, technology is not my strong point today.
We've moved. Our normal boardroom is over in Beresford Street, but we wanted to have it here so that it could be closer to you, and so far to drive. Well, I can lead us in the karakia. There you go. Kia ma kira kira kira, kia ma tala tala kitai, e hia hia ma te awhakura, ke tiro he huka he hohuna, ti hei malola. Although this is a formal meeting as such, I do have apologies from councillors Barber and Donovan and community board member Greg. Let's forget Greg's last name. Mitchell. Greg Mitchell. Yeah, so we have those apologies. And just do us just remind that so what we'll do is we'll get staff to give us a presentation, and I ask that you hold the questions and so make notes if you can, so that we get a fulsome introduction to the issues, and then we'll try and make sure that we get all the questions addressed. And if you do have questions that aren't addressed, we'll make sure that you give them to us and for staff to follow up. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I just had apology from Celeste Donovan for lateness. She went to New Brighton, so she's on the way. And also Vanessa Wynne, one of the a local MP. And I think Lily's here from her office. So yeah, hey Lily. So I don't know if it'd be okay for Lily to cover the table or just stay there. But
local representatives and residents. So
okay.
Yeah.
Right. But I just wanted to acknowledge that the apologies from Vanessa for the meeting. But I appreciate sitting there with. Cool. Thanks.
So now we have John Higgins and whoever is presenting, if you'd like to come to the table and introduce yourselves to us.
And apologies, we don't have a clicker, so you'll have to tell me when to move along the slides.
Yep. Okay, so I'll start off with some introduction. So I'm John Higgins, I'm head of planning consent for the council, and to my right, Lizzie, who's a solicitor at the council. I'm going to remember your last name now.
Rachel Colin was originally Colin Wilson now.
Rachel Wilson, who's the planner at the council and has been processing consents, and Craig Jorgensen, who's been leader of compliance in the council. So first of all, I just sort of start off by acknowledging that this has been an ongoing issue and it's been frustrating for the local residents. So I just want to acknowledge that. And we want to explain about how the process has sort of panned out the way it has. So hopefully we can give a bit more clarity today. I won't sort of hold you up. We'll get straight into the presentation.
Thank you. Right, so next slide, please. So what we thought would be a good idea to start up with is what's permitted in this area, and then we can expand on that with So the storage of containers and industrial activities, warehousing, distribution are some examples of what is permitted in the zone. And then what we thought we just in this bullet points kind of just put what are permitted and what's kind of anticipated in that area. So For example, buildings up to 11 meters in that overlay, which is adjoining the, in the ODP area, adjoining the reserves area. And that would be the green space to the north and to the west would be landscaped, and it has some restrictions about structures in there. And any activity which is permitted does need to comply with certain things such as noise, built form standards which are relevant, whether it's adjoining a residential zone, a park zone, waterway, natural hazards, and then earthworks and transport chapters. So it can be permitted like the containers, but there is other components and other chapters that we have to look at the same time in a coordinated manner. So the main issues that arrived from this is whether the containers could classify as buildings and whether they exceed that 11-meter height overlay due to that. The noise created by that activity, even though it's permitted, making sure it complies with Chapter 6. And the setbacks, in particular, the green space zone, which we addressed in the current resource consent board, which is the next slide. So we thought it'd be good just to show that the snapshot of like the differences between the Port Link outline development plan and what's been currently consented in the resource consent, which has had an objection lodged, which we'll discuss a bit more in detail. So as you can see on the left-hand side, we've got the ODP outline development plan, which kind of doesn't have any wording to it. It just explains that the key structuring elements are what you need to be in accordance with when you develop. So as you can see along the northern and western areas, we're surrounded by green space, and that's called the landscape green space zone. Probably haven't got my terminology right, it's usually have to read it from the district plan, it's very long-winded. And that is anticipated that you have to plant in accordance with the appendix attached to the Port Link, which is quite dense trees and some like very heavily native vegetation. And also to the middle bit, that would be where the stormwater treatment basin for that area is, and then eventually links onto the haulage, as we call it, the old haulage route along Cumnor Terrace, which connects into the cycleway. What has been consented in the resource consent application is an intrusion into that green space area with ceiling, with a bund, an acoustic fence, a rail fence, and intruding with some buildings in that sealed area. The landscaping, it's quite good while we're here just to explain what the landscaping has been outcome from the resource consent is that we, with the ecologists from council, have focused on the northern area to be focused on lizard habitat while balancing amenity of the activity. So I can show a cross section later where it shows that we are trying to achieve sheltering of the activity, but then trying not to shade the lizards. And then to the southwest, more the west side, that's more focused on waterway enhancement. And as you trail down the haulage route, it focuses on birds and retaining the bird habitat, and then going down to a general enhancement where whatever works with that planting, and also supporting that community planting, which is an existing council land. There is also other structural elements with the ODP, such as the road, which at the moment that end part is private, has been proposed as private for now, and has got a right-of-way gross. So that means the public can access it, but it's just not called a road. And that is probably the key fundamentals really of the Port Link outline development. Really. So probably next slide. Thank you. So the resource consent and also the subsequent certificates of compliances have been addressing these non-compliances which we've identified. Firstly is the building discussion, whether it's a container as a building or not, and whether it exceeds that 11-meter height overlay. After that 11-meter height overlay, what was on the other slide, it's no height limitation. What we picked up in the resource consent is that because it's a building, it doesn't meet finished floor levels, because you need to do that for flood management area, and there's also the other natural hazard components in the subdivision and retrospective filling in some areas around the waterway as well. Noise standards have been exceeded in the open space zone, and the applicant has proposed in the resource consent to put mitigation measures such as the bund, the acoustic fence, and the noise barrier to ensure compliance. And as mentioned, the waterway intrusion to the Heathcote, and then just some quite generalised subdivision non-compliances, saying that it's in a natural hazard overlay, some servicing, mine servicing and non-compliances, and vesting of that reserves all the way around. Sorry, I missed the last bit. Some contamination was found on site above background, but below guideline levels. So that's a controlled activity. And then most of all, what I mentioned before, that they're not in the northern area in particular, they're not in accordance with the Portland County. And if I need to slow down, just let me know, because I do like to rub it on very quickly when I talk. So next slide. So this is the timeline, kind of what we have been, has happened over time. So as you can see, there was a private claim change in 2008, which would have been called a different name at the business zone probably previously, it was here in the city plan, but it's an industrial zone anyway in 2008. The site was, there was quite a number of subdivision and earthwork consents before then, and the majority of the site was consented, fulfilling the one-way setback. Then the activity happened in mid-2022, and the enforcement shortly arose after that in July. We issued the first abatement notice in October, and then had an agreement to put a stay in until they achieved the resource consent to resolve the building height issue. Not building height, sorry, the intrusion into the open space. That's the second thing.
And as part of that first abatement notice, they did need to remove containers out of that area, which they did.
So, and then that led on to the resource consent application, which was to discuss without prejudice heights of buildings and containers, as well as that intrusion into the open space. That 4th of May, there was an agreement to lower the containers down to 4 on the site.
Correct. And that was just, I guess, council asking or appealing to the applicant to reduce the height on the northwestern side of the site, which was the new area that came online at that time, and they agreed to do that.
And then while the processing and that in the background was the resource consent processing with request for further information, and so by the 11th of August, my recommendation was public notification due to ecology, visual amenity, and noise effects. Noise were more of a lesser minor. They were more of a limited notified, but it all gets bundled together as a public notification. As a result of my recommendation, that led to the resource consent being amended in November. Might have been the wrong date, but that's all right. That's okay. And then subsequently, they applied for a certificate of compliance, which we'll go into a bit more detail in a minute, which was really just addressing the issue of building heights and providing different examples. And that led to the hearing in the 14th of December and the decision which refused the certificates of compliance and classified contained septic containers. Then that led to the second abatement notice, which was about building heights in that one. So apologies for my error just before. And then shortly after, the resource consent was decided, which was quite amended to that original consent. And then appeals were lodged for the certificates of compliance and the abatement notices, and then an objection for the resource consent conditions was shortly lodged as well. We've just achieved a stay agreement ordered by the court, and Brent will go into detail about that in a few more slides. And we have the potential to have an objection for the resource consent conditions. Again, Brent will go into more detail with that, and then we're looking at the deadline for filing the declaration for the 5th of April, and then hopefully an environment court decision for the end of 2024. So the resource consent. So before I go into detail of what was granted, it's quite important to know that there's 2 decisions with a resource consent. So you have the notification, which is establishing what effects level there are, and you have a few stages where you can either proceed as non-notified because the effects are low, limited notified, which is for the adjacent neighbours, and then wider effects for public. Then you also have the separate decision of a substantial decision whether you think it's acceptable and whether there should be conditions. So in the November 2022 original application, it was recommended public notification, as I said, for ecology, visual amenity and noise altogether. They amended the application at the time to remove the building height conversation out of the amended application, propose conditions to ensure compliance with the noise and also address ecology and work with ecologists to come to an outcome. So with the ecology in particular, as I mentioned, the outcomes, what we wanted from ecology, there was some effects created. However, the enhancement side outweighed the negatives with that, and that's why it was, and it didn't have any effects on the adjacent neighbours, so no notification and not big enough to be public notification. So we issued conditions to ensure that what the ecologists, our ecologists were working with the applicant achieved the goals, what we consider to be in accordance with the Outland Development Plan. And then the container heights, there was, because the site has been filled, consented, most of it was consented filling on the 11-metre height overlay. Because it hasn't been subdivided, the heights of the ground level changes their height measurement. So even though they were saying that they were complying with the site, because they were proposing 4 containers high, it just intruded by a metre. So that was covered in the application. So we recommended approval, which was assessed by an independent commissioner, and they processed it as non-notified and granted it with conditions. Next slide.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Rachel. Just to introduce myself again, my name is Brent Busy. I'm a lawyer at the City Council. The reason I'm involved in this project is because there's a number of kind of legal proceedings in play here. It makes it a little bit confusing for everyone. That I've been involved. That key issue is about how the district and the council's interpretation is that containers stack on top of each other.
Yeah.
And it's engaged in the activities. No, not that's the issue. That's been the issue that the council and the community since July. And the first process to try and fix that was the council said we're going to issue a maintenance. Why to get those containers off? And said, well, cover it. How about we agree to keep the containers at a certain limited height, lower than they thought they were, whilst they applied a resource configuration. The council said, yep, okay, please do that. And that got through to about May of last year. And as Rachel said, the council then said, look, we're going to make that resource consent. Other people would be entitled to take part in it. And the person engaged in the activity at that stage said, oh no, that's not this. And around the same time, the council through Craig said to them, look, we're having ongoing effects from our things. So we agreed to keep them lower, even lower, while we get that sorted. And so they agreed to do that.
That was by agreement, not through enforcement.
Yeah, and so that was by agreement. And so they pulled the plug on trying to get the height issue resolved in that resource consent application. The council said to them, well, yeah, okay, but we still need to get it resolved. And so that's why they applied for something called a certificate of compliance. And that's the next slide. And certificate of compliance is just a certificate that a council issues under the RFA for activity that is permitted by the certificate. And so anyone engaged in any activity is entitled to ask the City Council to issue a certificate of compliance saying that the activity that they describe as permitted, and if the council agrees that it's permitted, the council issues that certificate of compliance. And so they applied for it. The reason they applied for it was, as I say, it's a way to try and get this interpretation issue resolved. And John, for the council, said, let's make sure we've got a couple of highly qualified, legally qualified people making a decision for the council on that interpretation issue. So the council appointed a barrister and a partner in law firm. And so they issued their decision on that interpretation issue on certificate of compliance. I think that was, what date did we say in the time? It's
29th of January.
29th of January.
Yeah.
And their decision was in favour of the council's interpretation. Containers are, therefore containers need to comply with the investment. Now, while they were doing that, as Rachel said, the applicant had continued with the resource consent application, that the applicant intended to not address the height issue. They wanted the height issue resolved, and that's rather than that resource consent. So they continued with that resource consent application, and that's the one the council granted. But the council imposed a condition on it that did address the height issue. So at around the same time, we had the council issue two decisions and two related processes about exactly the same topic, how containers buildings are not. So in the certificate of compliance decision, our commissioner said containers are buildings, so they have to comply with that. And around the same time, you had the commissioner on the resource consent application issuing a resource consent that said buildings and containers must comply with the following conditions. So it was kind of a double hit against the applicant. I think it was 1 week after that decision, Craig Scarlett, the council issued an enforcement, an abatement notice on the container operator saying containers are buildings, breach of the height rule, you have to get in done. Now, next slide, please. So it's as a result of that, that's not the everyone's got appeal rights. And there's two types of appeal rights. And this slide deals with kind of three related court proceedings. Okay, so first, or one of them's kind of super court proceedings. So the first one is about the resource consent application. That's kind of called an objection up here. Under the RMA, when the council issues the resource consent decision, anyone can lodge a formal objection with the council against that decision. They also have a right to appeal to the environment. They can do an objection and then appeal if they want to. And that's what they're doing in this case. So they lodge their objection against the council's decision on the resource consent application. The council staff are now processing the objection. Council staff will make a recommendation to the commissioner, and the commissioner will probably hold a hearing meeting at least, at which the objector presents their case and the council staff present their assessment, and the commissioner will make a decision on the objection. If that decision on the objection goes against the consent holder might be appealed to the environment. Okay, so that's the first item up there. Second item that I've called appeals is appeals against the appointment notice and the certificate of compliance. So there are appeals that have now been launched. So you've got an appeal against the abatement notice that Craig's part of the council issued saying they have to be the height of the contained standard. Saying that abatement notice was wrongly issued. At the same time, they lodged an appeal against the council's decision by the other commissioners on certificate of compliance. So no, that decision was wrong as well, because containers, they say, are buildings. So those two appeals put that issue in the jurisdiction of the environment. So the determination of that issue is now out of the hands of the council, it's now in the hands of the environment. Now, at the same time as lodging those appeals, they applied as they're entitled to be that stay of the council's enforcement. This is just a court order that the council they applied for that. The council and what they did was propose a condition on the stay. And maybe if you just click on to the next slide, it might be useful. I can't read this actually.
Um,
So this is showing the condition that the court imposed on the stay of the abatement notice. So this is in order that the court issued on Monday of this week. And the court order says, okay, the council can't require the applicant to keep those containers down to so long as the operating.
which is, if you can see that they're not putting any containers in the open space, they're putting them just outside. There's 4 containers, then stacking them to 5 and then stacking them to 6. So when we get the next slide, it shows you just a little bit easier, but that's what they're planning to do. Spacing it out. So that's as we said. Back to you. Do you want to go back? To the
Yeah,
slides?
yeah. So back to that one. So that's the stay that the court has issued with that condition. Now, when we had the first kind of meeting with the lawyers and the judge about those appeals, the applicants said that one way of resolving that building height interpretation issue is in the appeals. But there is another way to resolve it, and that's something called a declaration being issued by the Environment Court. And again, this is something that Leon's entitled to. The declaration just means the Environment Court declares the answer to a question. That's all it is. And so the question that the applicants say they are going to ask the court to determine is, are containers buildings or not? But they thought that was a better by day. I mean, the applicants thought that was a better way to resolve this height issue than do it in the appeals. Council didn't agree with that. The council opposed it. The council said, no, that's just going to waste more time. Let's get it resolved quicker in the appeals. But the judge didn't agree with us. The judge said, no, let's give them a chance to lodge that application for declaration. And he set a very good timeline for them to do that. At least. And that's the 5th of. So the court's order is that if they are going to apply for a declaration, they have to lodge that application. Now, if they do lodge that application for the declaration, the court then decides what the time frame is and what the process is. That's up to the court. There's no kind of fixed rules that the judge to run a process that the judge really thinks is fair and timely, because the council continues to we want this sorted out. Even though it doesn't seem to we are doing our best to get it resolved. So it's going to be in Judge Reed's hands what that process is for the declaration of that. April, our kind of realistic year assumption is that if the court moves reasonably quickly, court terms and the Environment Court. But I don't want to create false hope, and that there is still a possibility of appeals to the High Court, but we don't. Next one. It's just the pictures. Thank you.
So,
Yeah, it's just to reintroduce myself. My name is Craig Jorgensen. I'm the team leader of RMA Monitoring and Compliance at the council. So we obviously have a role as well. And Brent's actually covered things off really well, but just to reiterate, the key issues from a compliance perspective have been the height, and that's obviously Brent's just described what's happening with regards to that. The initial abatement notice back in it was 2022 was to deal with issues involving encroachment into the landscape and stormwater area. The abatement notice was issued. The applicant removed offending containers from that area, and with agreement from us at the time, they were allowed to keep the hard stand area pending the resource consent decision being made. The other, I guess, non-compliances that have been addressed have been the earthworks and bunds. the waterway setback encroachment, inconsistency with the outline development plan and some subdivision matters, and they were all addressed through the resource consent, which is now obviously under appeal. So that leaves us with a bit of a problem, and particularly that's with regards to noise, which obviously has been a big concern for the community. The applicant's own noise report indicates that there may be non-compliances on the site at times. And now that the resource consent is, for want of a better word, on hold, we are not going to get those mitigations in place until that's sorted out. So what we've done is we've asked the applicant to demonstrate to us how they are going to ensure that they comply with the noise standards in that interim period. Noise is a very difficult issue to deal with. And to be frank with you, I've been out on site with noise monitoring people a couple of times, and our noise guys have been out there a lot of times, and we haven't found non-compliances. But I'm fully aware that there are reasons for that, and that's because the noise is intermittent. There might be banging and crashing that's really loud, and by the time a noise officer gets there, it's quiet. So it is a difficult one, and something that we're going to have to focus on in that interim period, and ensuring that we are addressing that. The I guess from a compliance perspective is if there is demonstrated non-compliance with noise, then we would be looking at further enforcement action.
Right, are you all happy to take questions now?
Sure.
All right,
So I'll just stop the screen and so the camera can
Yep.
see everybody.
yeah, we'll just wait for the, so, I mean, it does seem, and it's, as you were saying before, I invite community members to ask some questions first. Just that it does seem very unfair to the people who live in the area to be at the mercy of an applicant who doesn't seem to want to reduce the impact on local residents, and that, you know, I mean, you're now in the position of having to get them to adhere to the basic noise standards, which they're not, and with potentially years being delayed in court. And it as local representatives, it just is incredibly frustrating to know that in my view, the people who are doing this are doing it because they can, and they know the process, and they know how to take advantage of it. And although perhaps initially the council as an institution hasn't done its best by the community, in more recent times, the enforcement and everything has been ramped up, and we're in a position where the resource consent conditions are really tight, and yet there's just so many avenues, so many legal avenues for them to go down that, you know, you as much as everyone else, from not having to live there, is at the mercy of the Environment Court and potentially the High Court, who knows. So yeah, that's where we are. So I just want to open up to Ben and Melissa, and I'm sorry I forgot your name, sir. So it's Melissa? Lotta? Sorry, Lotta. And Richard. So you three, if you have any questions of staff, I'd like you to go first before us, like the politicians do. Now, I know that's not the normal order, but yeah.
So what is the status of the resource consent now in this situation? And what has been, what's the basis of the bill against?
So what it's doing is pretty much, it's kind of, I would call it, would you say upheld? It's not operative. So when in the Resource Management Act, it says a consent is commenced once the appeals have been resolved, if there is any appeals So now we're in that appeals area, it just means that really the consent's not live. So with the conditions, that means that we can't apply any of the conditions currently until we get this resolved. So with the objection, the key thing that has been objected to is noise conditions and some minor conditions which are a bit more administrative, maybe correction, I would say. But I think the key focus of it is noise, and that's what we're working with currently.
So you're addressing that at the moment. You said that initially you prepared a recommendation. And the three concerns of quality noise. And the noise was one of the main things. Notification. Shouldn't we now be invited into the process? If you're looking at relaxing or diluting any of those conditions, address the noise, but then meant that you could.
So the process, the resource consent process is completed in terms of that, making a decision on the resource consent. It's been objected to the conditions. So that process is ongoing. It doesn't allow for third-party involvement in that process. What we can look at and what we are actively considering is the enforcement compliance side of things. So we're looking at that aspect. It's not something that the public can be necessarily be involved in, but it is something that we're looking at to address the ongoing.
But in your discussions with that, they're presumably
yes.
If you agree to relax that, does that not then trigger a reconsideration from your point of view? Should then be notified.
The provision of notification on the report is that what they recommended in their Powell Fenwick report, their recommendations, that was what allowed it to go non-notified. So that was making sure that it had the noise management plan, it had the containers in a certain way. So what they're objecting to, my understanding from in detail, is that it's the things which was added as well on top of that. So it's the notification was addressed, but then with the substantial decision, we impose further conditions to retain the residential immunity. So it's the section 95 was already addressed through their volunteered conditions, but we added more to retain.
The commission is
Yeah, my recommendation, board council recommendation.
just going back to your question, the commissioner, when considering the objection to conditions to the noise conditions, will need to consider that very issue. Is it okay to relax the noise conditions? So that will be part of this consideration in terms of whether it's change those.
So it is a prospect that they'll return it to you and say this is out.
No, I don't think there's scope for the commissioner as part of that. It's an objection to conditions, and that's all the commission for that is the conditions themselves, but not revisit the whole process.
Any further questions, Richard?
Yes.
Well, okay.
The landscape area. I know that California report suggests that the mitigation would come from creating a barrier. And that also at the same time, the applicant asked for to be able to stack 2 biocontainers in behind that barrier, which invites activity in the area behind the noise barrier.
They concluded that the acoustic fence would be, and the overall 2 containers high would cause as much noise. And so they concluded that it would affect that noise conclusion, what they already said in this variance. The acoustic fence on top of that bund. So that was.
So machinery makes noise.
Yeah. Do you understand that? But that's their assessment stated that the mitigations, what they proposed was enough.
You see that recommended that covered off on the California report.
It was mentioned. I just to check it a few times.
Are you talking about activity between the bund and the acoustic barrier container? Yeah.
The 2 containers high, because it more about the hoisting when they get higher up. And that's more of the climate reverberation. That's what the Alvin and also our expert agreed with. They agreed with the conclusions, but they added more conditions.
Lotta, you question?
Yeah, yeah, we've heard here that you've had a lot of dialogue with the applicant and the tenant. Well, however, you've had none with the residents, and that to me seems a little bit weird, considering local democracy, that the residents haven't been heard once, and now you recommend that they're not heard in the future either. And basically, reading this decision of yours, like, first of all, when I heard that industrial area, a new industrial area is built next to an existing residence in 2022, I thought I was in time machine. Because, like in rest of the Western world, they have relocated industrial areas away from residents because of the known adverse effects on residents. However, the original consents and now this one just keeps repeating, there are no adverse effects on residents, minor effects on residents, negligible. And however, you've made no studies, you've made no interviews, you don't even reference any scientific studies, because you can't, because everything, all the international evidence shows that this kind of industrial zoning next to residence has adverse impact on. So kind of, it's very convenient for you to come up with an opinion that no adverse impact, and therefore this can go
Lotta,
non-notified.
Also,
It is completely a
I
cosmological
understand the
thing.
frustration, but it just, the stuff, it's important that we don't impugn the integrity of these professionals in front of us. Like, they have to take them as at their professional opinion. You can be frustrated and think that they're wrong and tell them that, but just be.
But even professional opinion should be based on something other than my opinion. And I haven't seen anything that would be based on anything, any evidence, anything. It is just my opinion. Yeah, I have a lot of opinions and some of them are wrong. And so my question number one is that why no real study of the impacts to the residents has been made, or why haven't you even looked at the international evidence?
John, would you like to
Yeah.
just take us through the process that the RMA binds you to?
So we are in a statutory process, so we have to follow that process by law. When we talk about opinions, it is, Rachel is basing her assessment on expert opinion. So the applicant had a noise expert, for example, we talked about noise, had a noise expert, qualified noise acoustic consultant. We had that peer reviewed by a qualified noise acoustic consultant. We've imposed, there's been a lot of conditions imposed to try and manage that noise as well. So not just Rachel's opinion, we've had different experts involved trying to inform that opinion and got to the recommendation. Well,
Yeah, I read the other experts and they provide absolutely no backing for their opinion either. Like it's just opinions drawn.
I think that their opinion is based on their background as an expert. They have done noise measurement, and they deal with these types of things.
Yeah, in that case, wouldn't it be good that those sources were referenced, so that people can actually check? Yeah, it's a bit of a similar issue with the climate change and flooding issues, because your estimates that still this new one relies on are from the 90s and early 2000s, so everything is pre-earthquake. So no current evidence has been used to actually measure, and largely scientifically, overwhelmingly agreed that the flooding risk has hugely increased. So if you're,
Lotte,
if you're flooding assessment.
excuse me, Lotte,
design-
if you could turn what you're saying into a question.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so why there are no current studies about the flooding risks or the increase, the impact of climate change on flooding risk?
So we obtained expert opinion from our Free Waters, and they did use the modelling which they obtained, which I understand. I can get the actual dates from flooding specialists, but they are more recent than the 1990s. They use LiDAR, and they understand that's there, and they understand all the different 1 in 200, 1 in 100 year flood events, and they also look at it with sea level rise, and they have got those updates. We've, I think one of the most up to date ones is 2000, not in certain areas. Some of them have actually happened in the last year or so. We do get those regularly updated, so I can get those data more response. I understand that you've had some correspondence previously with some of the staff members who gave the data, but I can try and find out those modelling. But my understanding from the stormwater engineers is that it is up to date as best it can. It's just the limitations of council in certain areas sometimes don't get them as fast as other places. And it's just we use the best information we have at the time.
I think Ben has a question.
We've got a good person that's loads of questions by email, so thanks for the responses to it and really diving through the various details of the various reports and businesses and findings and things. Recently, sort of immediate, lots of bigger questions in my mind, but any immediate ones, I guess, around the conditions that they're appealing, which relate to the noise and mitigation things. Was there any reason why they couldn't commence immediately mitigation measures and the landscape improvements and the sound feeds? There's some planting season coming up in the next few months. Is there any reason they couldn't start and things that are just very now?
Yeah, so it's I think the issue correctly with the objection is that it's upholding the whole decision. So whatever, if there's some, for example, the northern area of the OPP, it's dominated by lizards, for example. So that's a different legislation from us, but that would stop them from doing works in that area. But they also, with those intrusions into the ODP setback, because it's upheld, they can't do those as of right. So that's the issue there. But in other places, you know, let's say more western areas, they're not doing works which contribute the district fund, they probably could, but it is more the applicant prerogative to do that. Yeah.
We
So-
certainly don't want a situation where they do works and then have to remove them or change them.
But having said that, we will be talking to them. I indicated before about the noise, and we will be talking to them about ongoing management of the noise and what can be done. So there might be some things that can be put in place now that it's not help.
So-
Some things that couldn't get, pumps or something like. It was quite up there everything anyway, so yeah, they should have had it anyway. Yeah,
Lotte, did you have a follow-up from what Ben was asking?
Yeah, the noise monitoring, so you know the nature of the noise, that if it's in the petrol there, they won't catch it. So why haven't you installed constant monitoring?
Yeah, no, my understanding from, and I'm not a noise expert, but my understanding is it doesn't work. You can't, they need someone on site because there's other noise. Like when the day I was monitoring with the noise expert, he would have to keep turning the device off because there would be another source of noise coming from a different direction. They have a specific time they have to measure for. I think it's 15 minutes. Yeah. So at the time we were there were trucks going past on Tunnel Road, which were throwing out the measurements. So they had to keep sort of pressing a button to stop the machine and then start it again once the background noise had finished. And we've had this question multiple times on various sites around the city. Why can't you install a monitor that sits there and just measures the noise? It's because it can't be relied on and it's not accurate.
So if we've got an abatement notice, it wouldn't be,
Mm.
the word
The
is-
evidence would be.
Wouldn't stand up in
suspect.
court.
Yeah,
That's,
I think I create the point before, what's a good one, that's that, or was it you, Rachel? The council has expert reports from the experts that say that, in their opinion, we can doubt their opinion, in their opinion, the noise is in breach of the Craig's, yes, he's going to rely on that report by says breach of the plan. And the council has, as a result of that, said to the consent holder, well, because of your objection, you're not implementing the conditions of that consent, and therefore you're in breach of the noise rules. What are you going to do?
Yeah, so there's a conflict there, so your opinion is that there's a breach of the noise, but still there's no adverse impact on residents. So
No, that's not correct, because the council agrees that there's an adverse effect, and that's why the council has said to them, you need to comply with the noise rules while you're. So the landlord is not to-
so the reason the consent was granted was because it had a whole lot of conditions on which managed the noise. And that's what's not in place, those conditions. So that's what we'll go back and look at and address. If they're going to keep operating, then they need to manage that noise.
so what I'll do now is I'll open it up to elected members to ask questions of staff. You may want to ask questions of local residents if there's something that you want, some information they may hold that you don't. But yeah, let's try not to go over ground that's already been covered. Right, any questions? Jackie, and then Yanni, and then Tim, and then Celeste.
I just have concerns around the fact that the applicant has breached the resource consent that they have had, not the one that they've applied for, but they've been breaching the resource consent that they had over the last couple of years. They tar sealed part of the setback. They haven't complied with the conditions. They haven't followed their plan. And we have actually, as council, gone, okay, well, you've applied for your resource consent. So we're not going to make you rip up your tar seal that you blatantly put down there knowing that you shouldn't. Right? What, given that if this resource consent is upheld with its conditions, what guarantee can we give these residents that council staff will actually uphold those conditions? We've already heard that you can't uphold the noise, right? We know that there's clattering, banging noise, waking up our people before the time that they are meant to be working. But of course, when you get there, there's no noise. They're pretty much blowing you off, right? You're going in and saying, you started work early. Oh, we won't do it again. Oh, you did it again. Oh, well, we won't do it again. Right? What guarantee can we give these residents if the resource consent is upheld with conditions that council will actually enforce those conditions in a way that makes the lives of these people livable?
Well, yes, I can answer that. Just to clarify, there are resource consents that cover that cover the entire site. The breaches that we've identified are actually the district plan rules as opposed to the resource consent.
Okay.
When the new resource consent is granted, there will be fingers crossed, it's granted, there will be a list of clear conditions that we can hold them to, and we will.
But we could have been holding them to the district plan conditions.
Well, I guess that's what this process is about, and that's fundamentally why we're all here.
Right. My next question is the lives of the people across the river have been directly impacted by this activity. So we have children that can't sleep. We have properties that have devalued. What is in place to actually compensate these people for their loss? Right? This activity on this site has been impacting on the lives of the residents across the river now for a couple of years. And all we do is say, oh, well, you know, who's going to buy a house down there when they have to listen to containers clattering at 4 AM that you're not going to be able to prove to actually, you know, make them uphold their consent, because you can't. If you're not there at 4 AM, you can't prove it. And they say, oh yeah, sorry, what have you got for the residents in that event? Because these people are suffering. We've seen it now in Bromley for 14 years. I don't want to see the people in Wilston to be having to be fighting this for 14 years now.
Clarifying question, perhaps, is there anything in the resource consent that the commissioner granted that, if upheld, would give you more confidence that you're able to enforce those conditions?
I mean, the conditions should be, when granted, should be pretty clear, and I've read the conditions, and I don't see anything in there that's not enforceable. That's,
Okay.
I mean, these guys write the conditions so they can be enforced. So, I mean, I think the community's expectation of us is that we would enforce those conditions vigilantly, and that's what we'll be doing.
We've had an expectation that you would do that already.
Do you think it'd be fair to highlight the difference between the rules and district and set a number for the rules? Yeah, sorry.
That would be helpful.
But because I think there's quite a difference between the two in terms of the ease of enforceability.
Yep. I think that would be very helpful.
And so maybe as part of that, you could also touch on the reasonable or unreasonableness of the noise impact on residents as well.
We'll come back to that as a separate question. Sorry. So the conditions require. And by stacking into a certain point, that acts as a noise barrier. And that's quite different from looking at a number in the district plan and trying to work out the that number, because you can see the containers on the ground, you can tell.
And
there's still there.
And there's rules around how many times a year they can move the barrier and where the barrier has to be. And someone can come out and physically look at it. And I mean, I've walked around the site plenty of times, and I expect I'll be walking around it plenty more times in the future. And if the containers aren't where they should be at the right times, then we'd be expecting enforcement action and them to be accountable for ensuring that they comply.
Another thing just to note is that the district plan permitted and states that we wanted a 15, that you measure it across a 15-minute interval. With our engineer, acoustic engineer, they stated that that's a bit hard with this impulsivity because it's the pipe, isn't it? It's those.
Well, that's the thing, if it's at 5 in the morning, no one's going to be there,
So
are they?
the monitoring, and the monitor, so we in our conditions currently have stated that we've minimized that interval now from 15 to 5 to try and capture that better. Especially
Well, the thing was,
You're talking about seconds.
the interval time, so 5 minutes instead of 15. So that's how you.
But the noise is really bad for seconds. You're not talking about minutes. You're
No,
talking about.
But it's a shorter time frame
seconds.
to measure it, and so therefore it's a bit more that you can't go over that line. It's a bit more lenient, I think. I would say 15 minutes compared to 5 minutes to get that noise captured. If that makes sense, it's a way to capture that noise to measure whether it's one.
Stricter.
So the number of days within the 5 minutes as opposed to 15.
Yes.
Yeah.
Still not helping the ones that are being lugged around outside their normal operating hours, that you have no.
Just to clarify, I mean, my understanding, and all the times that I've been there outside of hours, that site has not been in operation. There is another site immediately to the south which does operate 24/7. So it's potentially, if there's noise, it's possibly coming from the other side, but which is, they still have to comply as well. But I take advice from anyone in terms of whether that site, and if that site is operating outside stated hours, or I've not seen it, but.
Well, I've read all the 200 noise complaints. I asked the council to send them to me, and they have been caught several times operating outside the hours, and there have been no repercussions to them at all.
I understand that that's
So
potentially the NZE site that's to the south.
No, this one.
Okay, I'll take you.
All right, can we, perhaps it'd be good to clarify that so that we have, because here we're having, we're disagreeing around facts which are reasonably easy to verify. So rather than spend more time in disagreement here, if staff, if you could clarify that, that'd be good.
Follow
Is it related to that
up.
or
The questionnaire that they just answered.
The information I have is that the hours of operation for that site are 7 a.m.
the 7 p.m.?
7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or possibly 6 p.m. and then
Yeah, that's the one.
was this one of the reasons?
Yeah, because we replace conditions while saying no nighttime activity, so that usually goes to up to 7 in the morning. Isn't it?
But currently, I think prior to the reasons consent, it was, or whenever I've been there, it's always been shut at 7 p.m.
Right. So then that doesn't preclude it from being operating when you're not there, of course.
Of course not.
Yeah,
No, I mean,
yeah.
we can't. do it
No,
all the
no,
time.
exactly. Alex, you had a follow up,
Yeah.
and then it's
Very quick
Yanni.
follow-up. So just clarify what you're saying is, in terms of the breaches before the resource consent process, that was in relation to the district plan, and those breaches are more like a certain amount of noise over 15 minutes. So it's a lot harder to monitor and, I guess, uphold. Whereas with the resource consent process that we're going through right now, there are a lot more conditions like the container and the sound barriers and other
Yeah.
forms that we can therefore
Which are
monitor
easy-
it, but
easy to
easier.
monitor.
And then the
Correct.
15 minutes is reduced to 5 as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just to note, they're objective to. that.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it
They're
doesn't
not
affect-
currently in
Yeah.
place.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
all things going well,
Yeah.
there'll be more mitigations and stricter and more enforceable.
Yeah.
Correct.
And there is an ability for us to review those conditions.
Yes.
So that there are problems.
And my reading of it is also that there is that the cost of monitoring will be on the applicant.
Yes, we on
And
charge, yeah.
So there is an incentive to comply. Yanni.
Thank you. So I should have said also apologies from Genevieve Robinson, the ECAM councillor as well. I was interested to know how we're working with ECAM. One of the concerns that I have repeatedly passed on, which doesn't seem to be addressed, is people concerned about the impact of the diesel fumes. Does anyone measure the impact of the diesel fumes like they do at Littleton and be able to assess whether it's reasonable or not in terms of the impact
Does diesel fuel from the forklifts?
from the heavy machinery? I was also concerned.
I'm not aware of
I'm not
that.
aware.
I'm not aware of it either, but
Yeah, I'm not aware of that being done, because obviously diesel machinery is being used all over the city.
So at
I'm
the
not
Littleton
aware that.
Port, one of the long-standing issues in the community, aside from the noise, has been the increase in diesel fumes into the local community. Given that you have an area where you've got basically an inland port, why would, I guess, and I know that you can do air discharge, right, and air quality, but you've also had a methyl bromide air discharge without a consent. Do you think it would be worthwhile working with ECAM around this? There's been a lot of issues of stormwater discharge, air discharge, and it doesn't seem to be a very good enough approach between the two organisations. So I'm just wondering how you've worked with ECAM, or if you haven't, how you can do going forward to look at those air discharge impacts.
Yeah, I think what we can do going forward is we can touch base with PCAN and get them out, get an
Find out
update
what
on those
they're
issues and how they will deal with that, the diesel machinery as well.
And so dust has been also an issue, so has that been considered?
yes, that was addressed in the resource consent. Because we were looking at, because the construction's gone, it's more the operation and raised as concern. But if you, we haven't really, if there's been complaints raised, we can look into that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I wrote this in December, so I'm trying to recollect everything.
There was certainly during the previous construction a number of significant concerns about the dust impact. So
A lot of the
They
site
covered
is
by-
sealed now, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that would have been covered by the previous earthquake consent, that the majority of the sites.
the other question that has been raised, which no one's really responded to, is the light clear. Is there any controls on the lighting on the site and the impact on the ecology or the residential adjacent?
They stated to us that they comply with that provision and also that they're not doing nighttime activities. And I think we asked that question, or they stated clearly in the application that they comply with it. So that's all that's gone to that at the moment. And then in terms of ecology, the key thing what we were looking at, especially like with birds, was trying to sort out where that shared path was to try and keep any glare of users of the reserve away from the bird habitat, and that's why the western side we pushed that shared pathway right to the pretty much right to the boundary of the western area to try and avoid those the kind of deadwood areas.
But if we measured the light,
Just to follow up on the light, so if there are, I'm not aware of any concerns or complaints at this point, but if there are, we can certainly get an environmental health officer out to measure glare if that becomes an issue in the future.
From recollection, it's the application has been applied for on the basis that comply with the glare standards in the district plan. So if there is concern about the glare that it's not compliant, then we can look at that.
we have big complaints with Brisbane Console, so you should have complaints. The brightness of the lights is really bright. That spotlight, I don't know what kind of lighting expert, but they shine, especially when the containers are not. So obviously when you've got containers blocking the light, but when they don't have containers, they are really bright, but really bright.
Within the site.
The lights are on the site, they're actually quite far back on the site.
NZD slide, isn't it?
Yeah.
But we can check the other site. Yep.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that's compliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you want to just talk about, because councils obviously pass resolutions to try and address the impact of residential and industrial being adjacent to each other. Is anyone able to give an update on what's happening with that? Because the frustration that residents have here is that this has been going on for 2 years. In the meantime, even before this, there was a request of council to actually look at this issue and come up with some better, or look at what plan change options were available to reduce the negative impacts or the adverse impacts of industrial on adjacent to residential. And we've got reports going back as far as 2019 that do highlight an issue with things like containers and scrap metal yards and car wreckers, for example. So yeah, it would quite be good to just maybe give an understanding to the community over what's happening with that process, and is there any ability for that process to have an impact on a better resolution to the issues that are occurring.
So I can probably answer that. So we do have someone working on that plan change to look at the industrial and residential interface issues. So that person is actively working over, they get getting pulled off for PC 14 work, plan change 14. So it's about managing, that we just don't have the resources to do it all. It wouldn't apply in this situation because it'll be a future looking. So plan change comes into effect that applies to future land uses, but it won't apply to retrospectively if people have got resource concerns.
Right.
So just the
do you think,
a resource concern,
given how much resource has been put into this around all the different things going on, if that resource has been put into getting a plan change sooner, it would have protected the community more?
Yeah.
Very good decision at the
I
time.
believe the residents already then proposed.
Sorry, but the consent's only just an issue. And there's been subsequent changes to the district plan for the site through independent panel review.
So, yeah, so if it came in earlier, it might have had an influence on this activity.
So how early would have new controls had to be in place in order to prevent this from happening?
Well, it's hard to say really, because the resource consent will have an impact on that. They also have existing use rights and things like that, so I'm not sure how it would have affected this activity in terms of the timing, but
So maybe 10 years ago.
yeah, it would have been some time ago, but obviously we're not at that point. We're still at the point of developing the plan change.
It's
and
just
be notified. It's not going to be a simple plan change because it will go out for public submissions. There will be a lot of industrial sites that will be want to be involved in the plan change process as well. So it takes some time to get through.
Am I correct in understanding that the current zone is site, so it's spot zoning, but it's generally industrial general?
Yes, that's right.
So do you think the fundamental problem is that this type of activity is more suited for industrial heat rather than industrial general? Because if you read the industrial general chapter of the council's district plan, it talks about activities that are compatible adjacent to residential and about low impact type activities.
So the activities adjoining residential areas is certainly something that will be looked at in climate change. So it might be that there are restrictions on the type of activities that are allowed where it's adjoining residential zone.
Just to add, just from the reason consent perspective, for an industrial heavy zone, there is a specific definition that you have to meet to be able to qualify as an industrial heavy. This one falls into like warehouse distribution and industrial industrial activity, which is a lot more encompassing than an industrial heavy definition. That's actually got quite a lot of like criteria that you've got to meet. So, for example, like a waste transfer station is an industrial heavy activity. It's using refuge. So it's what is in the writing, it's the devil's in the detail, and that's the difference, and that's probably what we're talking about, is that kind of conflict, which needs probably looked into the plan change.
Could you please clarify the marching order here a little bit? So this was, this zone until, like, I don't remember what year it was classified as industrial light. So was it that because the resource management application was made for industrial general, that you made the decision to change it because of that, or was it changed before and then?
It was 2008, so it was called a business zone type.
Before.
Yeah, business zone, which really equated to industrial general. So when the district plan got changed in 2016, it just changed over in name and transitioned slightly with some modifications, I would presume, to the zoning.
Largely just a name.
Yeah,
change.
it's so it's
They
the
just
same.
renamed it
So-
in the
so-
new district plan.
Yeah, so it's pretty much been the same since 2008.
Oh, we've got a speaking order, but you just,
Just a quick comment. I don't think it'd be an issue if they weren't being stupid about it, the zoning.
well, it does seem that misbehavior by the applicant is the main cause of the problem here, rather than the zoning, and there being unwillingness to adapt to mitigate the impact on the community.
I don't disagree with Councillor Johansson's comment around there's probably scope to put in tighter controls where there is.
It needs to be a buffer zone.
land uses.
In case these people.
Yeah, because you're relying on a resource consent now to manage
Yeah.
a lot of this activity, where that could be part of a district plan.
I think, I mean, we've discussed as a board previously, we support, there needs to be some kind of buffer zone in the industrial general so in the future.
Yeah, and there used to be many years ago, there used to be B3B and B4B even, which is called a business hall buffer and business 3 buffer zone.
Yeah. So is this the fault of the independent hearings panel that impose a district plan on us?
Yeah, I don't know the detail of it, but
This was done by a plan change as well.
Yeah, this specific one, yeah.
Yeah, the specific one
Yeah,
was
the
a
proper
plan
plan.
change.
All right.
I just wonder if, I don't know, there's lots of stuff that's happened, but you know, if you read the original plan change, the council staff, the ecologists, if you go back and read the evidence from council at the time, there was huge concern about the impact on the ecology, huge concern about the 30-metre setback. Council actually wanted a 50-metre setback. And it just seems like it's really hard for the community to understand why suddenly all these things that we fought so hard for, I just get eroded by this constant use of amendments and changes or resource consents. And the impact is quite significant. So I just wonder if anyone's actually looking at the overall environmental impact from when the plan change went in and what the evidence was at the time, where it got to now. One of the things I read in the consent decision was things like the mature trees being cut down and the impact on the bird life, which has gone from hundreds to dozens. And it doesn't seem like any of that stuff really, it's hard to see where that stuff is given, you know, for a site of ecological significance along the river, where that stuff is given weight.
So it's because I did read through some of that hearing evidence, because I wanted to get quite a good context when I was doing this report. And it quite evolved even in the plan change itself, because it initially was proposed by our ecologists, 50, and then went down to 30. So that evolved by itself. And then I've hopefully tried to capture it as best I could with the bird assessment, is that we've had permitted activities and we have had probably subsequent, earthwork consents, which are anticipated in the zone to develop it up to scratch. But as a result of those permitted and industrial activities which have been anticipated in that environment and consented, that's what's led on to that flow-on effect. And so when when we get to this end point of this subdivision / land use, we can only look in what we can look in the statutory. So everything that's happened before, it gets a bit more difficult, especially when there's been approved by a resource consent or approved by a plan change. We have to just look at our statutory framework. So I do understand that frustration completely, and it's frustrating as a planner to have that, but that's what my job is, that we have to stick to the statutory
Just a final question from me is, I was sort of touched on before, but the health and wellbeing impact. So both from the impact on people's health and also a number of people have reported containers falling over, and several times, not just once. So can you just give me a sense of where does people's health and wellbeing, and where do things like safety for people,
Like the containers, I'm aware of a couple of incidents, and we've contacted WorkSafe and they looked into it. I don't know what the outcome was, but they have a whole lot of criteria around when it's a serious incident and when it's not. But certainly with a couple of incidents.
Going back to the other question about health and wellbeing, the RMA looks at it from the perspective of adverse effects. So if the adverse effects have been properly managed, then the health and wellbeing has been, in terms of the RMA, has been managed as well.
But we don't do any specific health assessment on people. No.
So are you happy with the way the adverse effects are being managed?
So the resource consent was a good step forward, and when that gets implemented with those conditions, we're not that happy with the operation at the moment, and then we've said we're going to go back and look into the noise type aspects. We've got the abatement notice around the height of the buildings. So we're doing what we can within the framework. We've got to operate in a legal framework as well, and that's what we're doing. And we're doing what we can within that framework. It doesn't address everything that framework.
Unfortunately, we don't have a statutory framework that allows the council to take that into account as much as we might like. And we were going to have the National Built Environment Act, which would have allowed repeated breaches of consents to be a factor in the decision making as well. Tougher enforcement position, but that was a priority for repeal by the incoming government, unfortunately. So next on the speaking list, we have Tim, Lily, and then Celeste.
Yeah, I'm from Australian District, and this is quite a hot issue in our area too. So we understand you may be trying to put
Yes, approach the board about doing the presentation, so we're just waiting for that.
Okay. Our major concerns are encroachment on the real space. So it's probably best if I leave my questions for them, but just be aware, a lot of people, we're caretakers of the Waitai Coastal-Burwood-Linwood plan, but young Hanson so much involved in, and we've got many community groups strongly pushing us on why is that house why is the river still having rain, and the mitigation is not enough.
So did you want them to answer those questions now? Or?
Just answer them saying, yes, I'll come and talk to your board with their good answer.
Yes,
okay. All right.
And we will come prepared.
Yes.
All
right. Well, we have the answer.
Probably enough.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Celeste.
Hi, thank you. A lot of my questions being answered. Just two quick ones. Around the noise monitoring. So you have to monitor something for 15 minutes. Is that right? What's the kind of standards for?
Yeah, I don't want to put anyone in crook because I'm not a noise person, but I understand that they monitor for 15 minutes and they have within that period they account for spikes in noise, and it's I think it's averaged over the 15 minutes, but I can certainly, I possibly will need to go back and confirm that that's the case, because as I say, I'm not involved.
And I guess the question that other question to get a response to would be, do you, because I've attended a noise complaint myself, and we talked through some of the issues about putting in a fixed monitor in place, and I can't recall the details, but there was some value in that. It might not be from an evidential point of view, but there are other things that would be useful from that. So I'd just be keen to find out a bit more about.
Well, it's certainly something I can certainly ask.
Yeah.
It's what the, as I said before, the information I have is that from an evidential perspective, it's not usable, but perhaps there is some scope for just for information. So I don't know.
So yeah, we can raise that again, because we did explore that with the environmental health team. They didn't support doing that at this time, but we can pick up that conversation.
So, you know, like, it's a bit like, so I work in public health, and the way that for an NGO, and when we report, we've moved from reporting using quantitative data, which gives a very small, very limited picture, to a qualitative narrative report, which actually shows the value of what we do. And I guess it's capturing the human impact of the noise. You might not be able to say it breached the standard, but actually having a recording that shows the spikes in noise, and very, very clearly is at least, I think, helpful for one, validating the community's experience, and two, providing a clear picture for decision makers and officers to respond to. You know what I mean? Like you can only be in a place so many different times. As you say, you know, it hasn't breached. They haven't been operating when you haven't been there. But if they have constant, if you have constant monitoring, there'll be strange noise anomalies when they said they weren't operating and things like that. So I do wonder whether there would be some value.
Yeah, you may be right. The problem though, and I'm not saying it's not on the table, but the problem we would have is, where does that anomaly come from at 2 o'clock in the morning? So if you hear a big bang on the noise monitor, we can't say that was from. It could be from the yard down the way. It could be from the truck.
But say if Lotta makes a noise complaint at 2 a.m. and saying that there's a bang, and then you have something recording, you can say that there is how this lines up, and over time you have a picture that either coheres with what the community reporting or it doesn't.
Yeah, that is a little bit what I was referring to. Instead of reading from this non-notified RSA, how this has nothing, like no impact on my property, no impact on my health and well-being, you know. Have I been interviewed? Has anyone in the community been interviewed? No, you have not made any attempt to find it. Stay there, that it doesn't.
Just as part of the information, that, correct me if I'm wrong, the information went to the commissioner. We did provide them a history of the complaints and the complaints, so they did have some appreciation of the issues.
Yeah, I sent all the data as well as like collated everybody and the key points in there, and probably 12-page summary as well. So we did send those through, and even updated ones as well. I think quite good.
And there was a bunch of emails that we said, I'll come back to you in a second. So there's reference to them in the resource consent decision. I think like it's imperfect, and there hasn't been qualitative interviews, but there's not no consideration, inadequate, but that's more to do with the legal framework than it is to do with any kind of lack of intent by the council. When we could resource that kind of thing, that's true, but that would be a decision for councillors like Celeste.
The process is highly prescribed, so it's quite difficult to deviate from that standard resource management process.
Well, because it was designed in a kind of idealistic late 80s, early 90s framework where just thought it would all be rule based, and we just set the rules and we'd stay out of court and we'd mitigate as it came along, and everybody would be happy. But turns out just ends up in court, particularly when you're dealing with rich people.
Yeah, and that's.
Yeah. So that's,
Oh, yeah, so just to really sort of close off that question, I guess we've kind of learned with the sort of noise complaints. Sometimes it's really hard when it's episodic, the sound of
Yeah.
noise. So creating like a way to kind of like have people have said verify that there are issues with noise, and then you can figure out where the kind of pattern is happening. So it might be at 7 o'clock as they're finishing up. The other quick question is, was it vibration? I don't know if that was covered, but what's the way that that's measured?
I don't think it was assessed, and our acoustic engineer looked at that, but there wasn't any direct measurement. But what they concluded is that slower touchdowns and actual better practices on site would nearly, it would reduce that significantly. So that's what the noise management plan, what they did actually adopt the applicants to put in, and we put more details exactly saying slower, get your workers to actually slow these down and try, yeah, exactly.
So just to include, they don't actually measure it though, is that right? They don't measure.
You don't measure it.
No,
We don't.
I don't believe the environment would have to measure vibration.
We'd have to get a consultant in to do that, because they put on size meters and things like that. So-
Is noise and vibration considered to be the same thing?
No, they're different.
Okay. And final question.
Sorry, the consent conditions you were saying are dealing with secretly, so specific conditions make the operation happens on the site.
Yep.
To ensure that the vibration doesn't.
How would you know if there's a breach if you can't measure it?
If we had concern
Yeah.
about that, we'd have to get a consultant. In.
Okay.
There are consultants that specialise in
So that could be followed up on if there was a pattern. Okay, and final question.
I'll just reiterate at this point that with the conditions, if the resource conditions get accepted and get in place, it will help with the situation. There's a lot of management measures and various things that will help to minimize the noise.
And I think
They're not there now.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
The final one is, it's just a point of clarification. Was there 200 complaints? Is that what I heard? Is there a number?
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I can't remember the number, but we did send through to Lotta
Okay.
the list of noise complaints. We did.
So it's big.
Yeah.
Also,
Thank you.
Joe.
Yeah, sorry, this that acoustic fence in place now. No, okay, and how effective are they?
That it would be affected. So, well, most people, if you look at a residential property with motorways and stuff, they are quite effective. So it's just the way they are configured, is my understanding. I'm not a specialist myself into this, but the way they're configured is how effective they would.
Okay, is 2.4 not just standard?
No, I think that's what's recommended by their consultants. So putting on top of the bund, and that's all to do with those two container kind of heights between, that container noise barrier. That it was to enable that noise for those ones.
So would the 2.4 be on top of the bund again, not including them?
No, not including bunds on top. Yeah.
it's got no gaps in it.
Yes, yeah, that's
Be a certain density.
yeah, that's density. That was the word I was missing.
And 2.4 would probably be higher than standard.
Well, standard is
1.8, yeah,
Well,
usually.
often they have a 2 metre
Yeah, that's,
requirement for acoustic.
yes.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I have a question. I'll go to Lotta and then Yanni after this. So this is a general question around. So that I forget exactly what it stands for. We use the VADE approach with enforcement, right? But when you have an applicant who knows the game and who is experienced and who has done similar developments or even just developments and has used the same approach of ask for resource consent after doing something they know they shouldn't do. Why does it start at V and not start later in the process? Like it seems like if somebody has got a pattern of behaviour, we should start further down the track towards being
Well, I guess
firm.
it didn't start in the sense that we did issue an abatement notice right at the beginning, so that would be at the E because we're enforcing it. But yeah, except that there is aspects of it that have been voluntary or assisted, but that's been in tandem with more formal enforcement action. So, yeah, it's been an interesting situation because there's a number of different aspects to it.
So it's more owing to the complexity than
Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps
And also
a
the
gentler
fact that
approach.
once the applicant starts to engage in a lawful process, we can't suddenly come in and more enforcement if adhering to the proper process.
In a way, we did that. After the decision on this certificate of compliance. So, you know, one approach by they once the commission is on the certificate of compliance. Craig and his team put it on the program said, that would have been started to be. So that is sort of what I'm suggesting. Not as timely as the community standard would prefer, but
Thank you. Lotta and then Jan.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up to what Jackie mentioned about the economic impacts to residents. So that, yeah, our property values have crashed, and yet the latest valuation raised the value of my property by 205,000 euros. It means that for a pretty much worthless property, I'm now paying on the double the rates as before. So is there any way of correcting that?
correcting the rates.
Correcting the property value.
Yeah, at least.
You can ask.
So that's a request to another part of the council.
But you can get asked for your rates to be your property value to be reduced.
I already did, and they said that, yeah, because it was assessed before that, like the company that did it before they actually put the container site there. So they didn't consider it, and they cannot consider it, but they claim that they can't consider it for, what is it, another 5 years?
Just
Yeah, we've done it.
Oh.
Oh, but it shouldn't cost them money.
John just suggested that I also touch on just the legal aspect of the question. That's the case law about the rates that can be based on property values issues by the council by process and process. So what the case law says is that councils and processing applications have to be physical environmental effects, not marked. And what the case law says is that, look, if you appropriately manage the physical environmental effects, then you're appropriately managing the control effects. So that's the case. Rachel wasn't able to process an application right to possibly effect this activity on property. But I take
Thank you, Jan.
I should say QV was made aware of this issue, both from Bromley and for this area. So there's something not quite right with our processes. So the shipping standards were there when they did the latest revaluations, and they were well aware of impact. So yeah, certainly when the appeal period was live. So I think we do need to think about, you know, how we do the valuations, whether those adverse effects can be taken more into account, because it's impossible for the community to comprehend, you know, why their property values would go up so significantly. And they lodge an appeal and then get told there's no issue when we've got, what, 200 complaints and, you know, however many other environmental impacts. What I was just trying to understand, and I know you've tried to kind of do it in your slideshow, but one of the really hard things to do is actually visualize what's actually going to go there when it's all done. So you've given us like the stay agreement, which basically we've got some sightlines you've got the acoustic fence. Is there a kind of plan that shows clearly, under the consent, that everything's agreed, what the visual impact will look like from the people that have to put up with it? So generally from the people across the river, like, the containers being stacked. And also, it's really hard to understand if there's going to be any pathways or any, is there any positive amenity that the local community will receive from like things like pathways around the site? Because it's actually quite hard to see. If you go around that site, what you see is the river actually it's encroaching into the, so the banks are quite steep in some places. There's trees that will start in the river. Yeah.
So the first part, I probably won't be able to answer that because what we received was these kind of like cross sections here. They're the ones, and I think what you're trying to get at is that this is a cross section side on, but you want a front on section from Gold Street and Long Street. So we didn't get those, but we did have the assessment from our landscape architect Jeremy Head, and he did quite like an assessment where even though he didn't show them in a physical form, he showed pictures of where he expects them to be, kind of, and where to look at them. So we can send you through that attachment of Jeremy Head's assessment, because it's quite, it breaks it down for you a bit better to make that understand, because we didn't get those supplied by the applicant. So the other part of,
So will people be able to see what they'll be looking at? Will that be clear from the documentation?
it's more in a written form than it is in a plan form. So, and yes, it will be clear in that assessment from Jeremy Head.
So basically containers too high.
Yep, and in the green zone, and then
So that's the view that people will have.
yeah, and then yes, and that at the moment for this resource consent, because it is different to the stay one, then it will be 4 containers high throughout the rest of it for the 11 meter high overlay. So that's the visualization for that. For the stay agreement, it's more that area where the 2 containers high won't be anything there. So we push back even further. So I think it's around, we mentioned it.
No, yeah, they haven't done that.
Well, no, that's what would be the 2 container limit in the new, in the approved resource consent. So the stay resource consent won't have the containers there, which are there to reduce noise.
And that's in the green space.
It's not in the green space for the stay agreement. It is in the resource consent.
So basically people will look at 2 containers stacked.
Yeah.
And all the associated like graffiti and all that they will just.
So what you've got as well, sorry, bring back the cross section. I can send these through, and they are all available online as well. The statutory plans is that you've got. Sorry, apologies for this. Too many plans.
Cross-section.
Yeah, the cross section one. There you go. So what you've got is, imagine, I'm sorry about this, it's not coloured. I'm trying to save colouring pages for the council. So here for the resource consent, you'd have 2 containers high, so that's around about 5.8 meters in this area here. Then you have a chain link fence, so for security reasons. And then up to this point is the applicant site. So this area here is landscaping. So what we've conditioned in the resource consent currently is that they can achieve up to a height of 16 meters on that area. So 16 meters is from the actual bund level, not that ground level. So you're going to have higher vegetation in the long run there. And so we've done that on this side of the fence because down this way is where the lizards are chilling. And of course they don't like shade, they like sun. So up to this point is dense vegetation to provide as much of a buffer as possible. So you might not see those the 2 stacked container high, and you might just see a little bit of the 4, because the 11 meter height overlay once that's at the sealed ground level, it's 11 meters, it's 4 containers. Then you're going to have 16 meters of vegetation.
That's what I want to see it.
The vegetation. I think seeing it front on would actually be more helpful because it's very.
Yeah, I don't have a front one sadly, but that's so. And then I'm coming to describe slowly up there. So at the top of the bund where that acoustic fence is, there will be also some vegetation which will be screening that fence line, which is lizard friendly. So it's not as dense, not as high, but it's vegetation. And then as we go down, it is rank grass because that's where they live. And so, and then at the toe of the bund, I think up to the toe of the bund, that will be all assessing what it is at the moment. It's a new woody species. So it was the balance between lizard habitat and screening the site at the same time.
Jackie has a question.
I just want to clarify something, because this came up with, also with the Bromley issue. What I've heard today is that the lived experience of these people did not factor in this resource consent, right? You haven't actually spoken to them or got an assessment from them, you've sent through their complaints, but their actual lived experience doesn't actually count. So we're giving more credibility to the habitat of the lizards than the habitat of the people. Would that be correct?
No, that's not what
No, I'm
it
just
did,
putting
and
it
that's
there.
not what the council did. What the council did was do a good job.
I don't mean that you literally ignored people, but in this situation, it's like they've been told they've got a setback from for the lizards, but the people haven't been spoken to. And I understand your limitations, and I understand that it's not in that that you've attended to everything that you need to legally attend to, but do you understand why the people might be a little bit more upset that the lizards get a little bit more consideration than they do?
Just on that, a lot of what's being put in is about the local residents as well. So
Yeah.
the bum, the noise fence, the landscaping, the container heights, that's trying to manage this activity so it is better for the surrounding
Just needed
residents.
the people. to get that.
So you're saying that there will be trees up to 16 meters. Probably bad because the trees grow into 16 meters. Everyone around is.
Oh, it depends what the trees are.
The native
Would be,
planting
but
aren't they? So
that's
it's
like
been
a
around
sort
for a
of-
long time.
We tried to get species as well, which are fast growing. That was the aim from the landscape architect.
Do you know what the estimate?
Cabbage trees.
Well, there's other species.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
I admit my first thought was cabbage trees too, and
Oh,
the
that's nice.
cabbage trees have good, ecologically value, but do you know what species off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head,
Be-
but I do know some of them may have been not even native, just to try
Yeah.
and get them fast up.
Be good to know what
Yeah, we can do.
the
I
timeline
think
is.
we gave them a bit of flexibility, because what we did in the conditions is state that they need to be in accordance with one of the council policy documents for
Yeah.
planting trees. So it is in line with that, rather than the ODP, because the ODP wanted totara,
Yeah,
quite large scale trees.
yeah, so
So we tried to meet in the middle there and get natives as best as we can and some fast growing
Yeah.
ones high. So I can get that. I can probably it is on the.
I know the species list is, but I don't know, I don't think any of us probably knows it, maybe Tim, how
Yeah.
quick different,
Yeah.
Tim Lindley, how quick species grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not too sure either, but the landscape architect was assessing that at the same time, and that's their assessment is short-term and long-term effects. So it's just how long they.
Just as long as they're not pine or eucalyptus.
Yeah, I think we try to avoid those.
Silverbird.
Yeah, no, that would, no, we avoid silver pictures being planted.
All right, well, I think we may have come to the end of our questions, and that doesn't mean that we can't ask more questions via email and stuff later. And I'm aware that there may be people watching this now or watching it later who will have questions too. So I'm just going to say to them, please get in contact with one of the community board members and we can ask staff questions. Is there anything that needs, before we finish up, is there anything that needs clarifying? Any questions for
I'd just
clarification?
like to get away with some clarity after what we spoke about. So my understanding is that if this limits compliance confirmed by the environment court, and remains a form.
No. So what the environment court is going to do is block the way to separate this. So the environment court says contains. That means that the container operator needs to either comply with the description resource consent. Now, at the moment, the container operator has resource consent that enables it limited breach of district plan and restoration requirements. And that's probably being treated by the operators of the whole position, if you like, while still coping. If the environment court says containers are totally within the operator's rights to apply, and the council will have.
At the moment, they confirm the decision on clients.
Yeah.
And they will observe that subject to applying for fresh resource consent.
Correct. Well, they'll observe whatever their current resource consent, whatever their current resource consent makes.
Which is for.
Yeah.
Just to clarify too, probably the court's really going to focus on the declaration proceedings, isn't it?
Which is the declaration, if I understand, is where they've said you can go 4 by 5 by 6 of it.
No, that's just simply over the district plan definition of building and whether the correct interpretation of that definition.
So once, if they did confirm it as being a building, then that would be extinguished, that arrangement.
Yes.
What, right?
So that stay arrangement remains in place until the resolution of the appeals. Yeah, so those appeals have been lodged twice, and so until resolution of those appeals, they're bound to in the meantime, they're bound to their court order. Now, if what they do is apply for declaration, declarations declarations result of the decision, the court will require the appeals to be so it's at that point that stay arrangement. So you know, this is the question. You know, how is it going to play out in practice at that point? So just correcting heads around that. So by sticking to that stay arrangement between the board says that containers of buildings, people that are coming what this person's consent may be sent to do, which is the stay arrangement comes to an time. Therefore, creates the council says to the operator, you have to get those containers back down to the level of that. The council decision.
So the objections and appeals to it against the resource consent conditions is being considered in the environment. Is there a chance that they will refer it back to you to mediate and to negotiate on those conditions?
So the conditions that Rachel is talking about on the resource consent conditions, I think that was by an objection to that objection to.
So that's between you and the applicant now to try and find
Yes, so an independent commissioner will determine that one.
right, and you as the famous you'll be firm on your conditions that you.
We have to consider, because we haven't really properly considered why they don't agree with the conditions yet, and we have to work through that sort of process. But can't give you an absolute sort
You
of.
have to deal in good faith with the process, right?
Yeah. So the commissioner may direct you.
Commissioner will come to, will come to a decision, and it could be agree with the council or disagree with the council. I don't know.
So it's only certificates of compliance that are in the environment.
So how many cases there are in the environment?
But two at the moment, but until it's 3.
Okay. So they're very difficult.
Is there another way of New Zealand or Christchurch making buildings, containers buildings?
Yeah, we
Yeah.
should change to a district plan. At the moment, this is an interpretation question.
Yeah.
The only way to change that is to do a change.
New Zealand wide resource management. A bit of legislation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah, perfectly.
I was just going to mention too, I think after the objection to the conditions, there is a right of appeal to the environment board as well. After that,
So if the commissioner confirms
the
that
conditions
then
are
they're
still
still got a right to appeal again.
Yeah, and
Mm,
just thinking about that.
yeah, it's is a question, yeah.
Yeah, just a very quick question. Just with all the legal processes, just trying to be really clear. Is there any opportunity in any of those processes that you've outlined for the community to have their say? Or are they just completely shut out of having any input into all those matters that get through?
We can't give legal advice on the ability. So, let's give you some information. So information is that there's no provision in the RMA to join as a party to objection against consideration. Yeah, and so that's information is that section 274 of the RMA says that people can join by application to the court as a party to legal proceedings in the court. So the objection is an objection to the council. So section 274 doesn't apply to the objection against the resource consent conditions. The 274 does apply in relation to the two appeals in the environment. Now, that's the end of the information. If anyone wants advice on whether they can use section 274 in this situation, they'll need to get the importance of it.
So basically, our best chance to be heard would have been if that would have gone out notified, and we were denied that.
Well, which we originally tried to make it, we recommended publicly notified.
But
But
we
of course,
made the decision of the.
yeah, they came back and amended it and
But it was your
reduced
decision.
it wasn't our recommendation, yes, but the decision was.
So just to finish that last one though, when is the deadline for appeal? Like when does the environment court process stop in terms of people? If people wanted to get the legal advice and then say, hey, we're concerned, what's the time frame on that at the moment?
They'll need to get their own advice.
It's a month after the the decision. I'm sorry, it's a month after.
So I'm not asking for legal advice, I'm just asking for factual information about the timeline around what the deadline is for people to lodge.
Yeah, there's a statutory deadline that's set out in section 274. There's also another section in the Act that talks about the court's ability to act in some situations. That's why I say
But just under the normal process, where are we at in terms of how much time's remaining before that opportunity runs out?
I don't know.
So
I'll send something to you.
Brent, as a lawyer, has to preface information that this is not legal advice. This is not giving legal advice. The board may wish to consider what further advice we might want to get as members of the public might. So I just want to finish this off by asking staff if you could over communicate to us rather than under communicate about this, and also to the community members who've been in contact, and to make sure that you have contact details for the members of the public who are here already, so that we can make the council as organisation can provide any updates and information. And are you willing to hang around for a little bit longer after we finish this briefing, if any of us want to have a chat with you?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, in that case, I just want
Can I just ask before we go to the community, are you getting the regular updates? You're getting the regular updates? Yeah. So
Yes.
So we've got the details.
Yeah.
We've got a list.
We would also like that the community board would get your regular updates, because one of your updates came to me via Facebook 4 days after it was issued.
Okay, we have been sending out sort of reasonably regular updates.
Yeah, well,
monthly
but
for
I
the last
haven't
while.
been giving them,
Okay,
no, they haven't been coming to me.
Yeah, it was,
Paul?
Is the applicant's appeal to council?
the objection to conditions, yes, we can provide you a copy. Is that up on the
It's on
website?
the website, yeah.
That's the appeals, yeah.
No, this is right.
Okay, yeah, we will put that up on the website.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Out of interest, did you have a result from the environment?
Email twice. Person who allocated access. She sent it on to.
all right. Well, well, on that note, I just want to thank everyone for your participation and for your questions. Thank you, Tim.
stretching.
Oh, you're stretching? Right, you're not sidling out. And particularly, staff, thank you for being in the hot seat and answering our questions. Yeah, I know that this matter hasn't finished, but we will continue to try and get a good outcome together for the community. And yeah, hopefully it's better rather than worse. So on that note, we'll just finish with our karakia. And people are welcome to hang around for a little bit afterwards for a chat if you like. Ia tau te rangi Māori o te rangi e tu e nei o papa tuanuku e takoto nei o te tai ao e awhi nei ki runga i a tātou. Tihei, mauri ora. Thank you, everyone.